Good, thank you.
Okay, all right. So is this everyone for today?
Yes, I think yes.
Okay, so today we're talking about culture, and I think this is going to be an interesting conversation that we have today. It's kind of an open-ended question, right? What is culture? So maybe we should start our conversation club today by asking that question. What is culture? Denise, what do you think? What would you say? What is culture?
Um, Usually, I prefer use science definition of culture. It's uh, I try to remember one specific word. It's a non-hereditary part of human behavior, of human character, and so on. It's a mm, some not defined at birth, part of not only behavior but probably mechanism of communications and some other social things. Uh,
Okay,
it's rather yes, it's rather small definition, but currently most of anthropologists think that culture is not part of only human nature. It's we can find some culture-like features in ape society and so on. So I prefer a rather wide definition.
yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, it is a very wide definition. I mean, or yeah, because I mean, culture itself is something that is so vast. I mean, what exactly do we define as culture? What do you think, Elia? What do you think culture is? How would you define it?
I think that culture is closely connected with so-called um, how is it called in English? Uh, the way of behavior, mentalitet. What is it for English? So
What I mean, the way people behave.
yes, the way you used to behave and
Maybe like just traditions or customs, but yeah, just
traditions,
behavior. Just
customs
yeah.
in society in general. Yes, that is a culture. And then, of course, culture includes all that are artistic things, all poems, some pictures of great artists, and so on, and some movies. They all create the culture of the nation. I think something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair sort of assessment. I would say the same thing. I mean, it's such a broad term when we think about culture. When I think culture, I think of language. I think of the way that people dress. I think of, again, maybe with language, the way that people speak, the way they speak to each other. It's not just a language per se, but it's how people communicate. Are they shouting at each other? Are they very calm? Are they nervous? Are they happy? Are they sad? You know, these are all the sort of things that I also kind of define as culture. Also, I don't know, I think about architecture, for example, what a city or a town or a village looks like, you know, what sort of building materials are used, what sort of planning there is. I think that's a kind of cultural aspect too. Um, Food, of course, what people eat. Is it based upon where they live? You know, if you live on the sea, do you eat fish? If you live in the mountains, are you, you know, eating a lot of hearty foods that keep you warm in the winter? I don't know. I mean, it's again, it's such an interesting question. I mean, it's such an interesting concept of culture. What exactly is it? How exactly do we define it? How do we understand it? So I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more in our club today. And let's ask the next question. Denise and Elliot, you're both in Russia, but you're in different regions of Russia. So, would you say that where you live there is a distinct culture, Russian or otherwise. Elia, what do you think? I mean, you're in Samara, right? So is there a distinct Samaran culture that you have, would you say? Or is it a Russian culture? Is there something else?
Yes, of course, as far as Samara is in Russia, so it is Russian culture here. But as far as it's not the capital of the country, but mostly provincial, big city, but provincial city. So that's why it is rather calm here. People are not so fast and not so modern, maybe not so fast in movings and not so fast in decisions either. So I think that's the difference in Moscow.
Okay, so you've got a slower sort of culture, maybe a more provincial, less metropolitan sort of.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and it concerns not only the physical movements, but also decisions and be, um, so they're more addicted to traditions. So here in Samara, we don't like to change very quickly. So changes, sometimes some modern changings come here sometimes very difficult. I think it's much more easier in Moscow and even in St. Petersburg, although I think that in St. Petersburg people are also people not so fast.
I'd say
So
that's something
that's
that
what
I
I
noticed.
think.
Yeah, in St. Petersburg too. I mean, St. Petersburg versus Moscow. And I was living in St. Petersburg for several years before I moved to Moscow. And I remember the first time I went back to visit St. Petersburg after living in Moscow for, I think it was maybe even just a couple of months. I was so frustrated with how slow people were in the metro. You know, I mean, it's like in Moscow, everything is much quicker. And I never had realized how maybe slow even a big city like St. Petersburg is comparison to Moscow. So it's all a matter of perspective and, you know, what you're comparing something to. But I think it's an interesting thing. What about you, Denise? What about you? Moscow. Is there a distinct culture that exists where you live? Is it a Muscovite culture? Is it a Russian culture? Is it something else? What would you say?
Yes, I was born in a southern city, rather big city, Rostov-on-Don. It's also a province of Russia. But to my opinion, there is no such big difference in big cities. Yes, southern people are more emotional, speak more emotionally, sometimes more fast. But on the other hand, in Moscow there are extremely fast speed of life. People move fast, take decision very fast. Not often speak very fast, but sometimes too. Most difference in place where I was, it was yes with St. Petersburg because here most people are generally less emotionally, and sometimes to me it was hard to understand what really happens and is it important or not for people which with who I talk about something and so on. And to me, difference between Rostov and Moscow is most in wellness, in economy, and in speed of life, but it's not great cultural differences to me.
Okay.
Only one big difference is the food, because yes, southern food is generally more spicy. And first time for me it was harder to eat something that's somewhere in Moscow. I prefer add more salt, more pepper. But now I can find interesting thing in both kind of cooking and different dishes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a fair sort of assessment. I mean, it's interesting. You know, I think that's well, it's a way again, it's a way we look at things, it's a way we look how we look at ourselves too. I mean, I'm trying to think what kind of aspects I would say there were of maybe Russian culture in St. Petersburg or Moscow where I lived. And yeah, I mean, maybe it's that, for example, in Moscow, it's that pace of life, that very big metropolis, this megalopolis, whatever you're going to call it. And I don't know. I mean, you also have, I don't know. I'm kind of stumped at this too. I mean, when I'm trying to think about what Russia is, how I would define some sort of distinct Russian culture, American culture, it's the same thing. I mean, I can't really think of specific things that are, I don't know, maybe working, a dedication to work. I don't know. Like I'm really stumped on this question. It's my own question and I can't really think of that. Where I live now, where I am in Croatia, it's, I don't know. I mean, again, I think that it's a very Mediterranean mentality, a distinct Mediterranean culture. I would say that that is the case. And when I mean that, I mean I'm saying maybe a more laid back lifestyle. You've got, I don't know. I mean, it's very, again, regionally different. If you're on the sea, people are eating fish. If you're inland, people are eating meat. I mean, and these are distinct cultures that you see even within a country. So I think that, yeah, maybe the smaller a society is, the more distinct culture you're able to have. Whereas the bigger a country is or a city is or something like that, things just kind of blend together and there really isn't space for that. Maybe, I don't know. That's just my kind of general observation on the matter. I don't know if that can be considered sociological research or not, but it's just kind of an observation. Next question is about how we interact with this culture and what role do you feel that you have when it comes to culture? Denise, do you think you have some sort of role to play in culture when it comes to, I don't know, maybe representing your hometown or your home country, or maybe other things that you find are important, whether it be food or language or customs, traditions, maybe work? I don't know. What do you think?
It's a hard question to me because I can't remember a time when I feel myself as a part of some local and definitive culture. So usually I try to understand something new, and usually that was not part of culture where I was born or I live or something else. And when I live in Rostov, some way of behavior was more similar not for South but for Middle Russia, and it was not hard to me to adapt when I relocated to Moscow. So I try to aggregate the most interesting and most characteristic, probably, part of culture I meet in my life, and trying to create some construction from different interesting cultural features and create probably my own culture. It's a little bit philosophy, but something like this.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's, again, like what kind of aspects that you have and what kind of desires you have to be a part of that culture. Elliot, what about you? What do you think? What role do you have when it comes to this culture?
Yes, it's very, I think, even difficult to answer because as far as I am just a small part of the whole culture, so it is very difficult to separate me, myself, and the whole society. Of course, I'm the part of the society, so maybe in most ways I behave like most people. It's the same thing as with rules of maybe it's the easiest way to behave is to behave like the most people do. That was the first rule in our driving school. I don't know whether I explained it correctly. So is when I
Yeah.
came to the other country, for example, because it is very understandable that you are part of society and what do you represent when you came to another country. So suddenly you became, of course, a representative of that very society where you came from. So, and I remember just one situation when I came to German. They also say thank you. Mm, thank you, and you should answer welcome. So, but I said also thank you, but never answered welcome. And one time, the host family asked me why am I so unpolite? I was a little bit shocked because I don't think that I am unpolite, but I really mentioned that I never answered welcome. So that was also the part of community, the part of culture, I think.
All right. Yeah, that's an interesting point because you've got these more that you think about those things, the more that you see what exactly you have when it comes to what you can offer for this culture. I don't know. I mean, that's what. Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, Elia, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can, but there was some problems, so I consider whether it's only was with me.
Okay. I don't know. Okay, well, I was just talking about, what role you have in your culture, what role you see, and how I've lived in different places, and it's kind of I don't know, a different sort of situation for me because I'm able to compare different things, and maybe the problems that I have, or the fact that I have expectations based upon one thing or another, and that's kind of a problem because people see as, oh, you're trying to teach us one thing or something like that, whereas you've got to find a way to just kind of share information, share experience without pushing or criticizing or something like that. The next question that we have is cultural barrier, the term cultural barrier. What does it mean to you, and what ways do you see that there are to get around it? Denise, what about you? Cultural barrier. What is it, and how can you get around it?
Mm, Cultural barrier for me, it's a situation where uh, two people can't understand uh, one another and can't predict behavior for future time. And I can first I meet this situation when I start working with customers from another countries because in for English culture usually it's hard to uh, directly impress some negative emotions, some problems, and uh, sometimes situation I understand that something goes wrong after few days or even few weeks after a problem appeared first time. Mm, Thing like this, I think, is the mostly cultural barrier. But I can't remember situation when I meet such problem when I travel abroad. Because if you understand that uh, people is from another context, is from they have different habits, different language. It helps to decrease complexity of communication and make sometimes try synchronize understanding by very simple uh, mm, I try to explain by marking simple and very understandable things, dividing problem by small pieces and discuss it one by one and some other. But if on other side, person not to try simplify understanding and try to act if you understand his opinion well, sometimes it's hard. I on my experience, the situation was on both sides. One of my teammates had the same problem. He never told no, even he have no ability to solve problem or have no knowledge how to solve problem. Uh, and sometimes it was a very big problem for customers. And also, I meet the managers on other side with the same problem, which can't mark problem at time and say that there are some problem or some misunderstanding or something else.
Okay, I mean that's an interesting point. I mean, it's maybe a matter of personal mentality too, and maybe will
Yes,
maybe an like wanting to find a solution versus saying that no, I'm not going to, I can't, and I'm not going to, I don't have to. I mean, there are different approaches that people have too when it comes to these sort of barriers. I mean, I think a good example that I can think of, for example, is people of well, for example, in Russia, there's some Russians I know who can more or less, not completely, but more or less understand the Ukrainian language. And there are other Russians who can't understand it at all. And I think and it's the same thing like with Ukrainians, but not so much in the same case. But I always noticed that people, Russians who are saying, oh, yeah, I kind of understand, they were people who were maybe more open-minded, that wanted to find a way to communicate with other people. Whereas people said, no, I don't understand it. It's a completely different language. It was more of a closed mentality, if that makes any sense, that you didn't want to maybe reach out and try to find something. And I think that's just an interesting example because, I mean, from a linguist's point of view, the languages, yes, they're distinct different languages, but they do share a lot of similarities. And if you kind of open yourself up to taking down a cultural barrier, I think it's a really good example of how you can or how you can't, depending on your personal wishes. Elia, what about you? What do you think about these cultural barriers? What are they? I mean, what does it mean to you? And what ways do you think there are around it? Can you hear? Is everything okay? Is your internet connection all right? Elia?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Sometimes I lose the connection, but all in all, in general, I can hear you. So, and the question was for me, am I right?
Yes, the question was for you. The question was about cultural barriers. What do you think they are, and what's the way around them?
Yes, I think yes, there are some cultural barriers, and yes, very often they are artificial, not real cultural barriers, because I think that small nationalities, small cultures, they try to build more barriers. They think that they will save in this way their culture. I think so. That is not only with the Russian and Ukraine people. We can mention many situations with pre-Baltic countries, with I don't know ex-USSR countries. Some mostly they understand Russian, but they can um, make the face that they don't understand any word. So the same bit concerns French people. They also prefer to speak French instead of English. So there are many situations like this. But sometimes I think when the very far from each other, the cultures that, for example, I think maybe some African cultures or things like that, they will be, I suppose, a real communication barriers. But as for me personally, I haven't such an experience. So that's for me difficult to speak from my own experience, just some to read in some books or in some articles.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, reading and doing a little bit of research, that does go a long way, doesn't it? So you kind of maybe know a couple of words or phrases before you travel someplace else, or just have a basic general understanding of where you're going. That's a really good point. All right. Continuing with that, what else do you think you can do to understand a culture that is not your own? Like you said, Eddie, I mean, reading a little bit, doing that sort of research, that's a great thing. What else do you think you can do? Denise, what do you think you can do to understand a culture just a little bit better?
For me, a better way to understand culture is to visit a country or place where this culture appears and grows. So, but sometimes the more interesting to get a deeper understanding to read some book about history of these places because not usually a real history of culture is limited only by one country or even by a country country is really placed on some territory. So yes, it's reading books, it's watching films, local films, because cinematography have many different cultural differences and local features. And also visiting this place and communication with people, trying local cuisine and looking at architecture. Many different aspects.
Yeah. Okay. So travel and research and watching films, watching movies, media. I mean, we have so much of an advantage today. I was thinking actually today, which is kind of not exactly on topic, but sort of. The fact that if you're interested in something or interested in learning something new about a new place or a new city or a museum or something like that, all you have to do is turn on the internet and do a search, and there's going to be information that comes up, articles or websites or I don't know, blogs, all different kinds of things come up with information, even reviews, personal reviews from visitors. All of that stuff comes up about these places. And we live in a time when that information is available and we have the ability to do this research and to really, get to know other things depending on what our interests are. And when it comes to films and movies too, I mean, there's so many things that we're able to watch and really get a much better understanding of different cultures. I think it's a really good point you
Oh, I remember about one interesting detail. It's sometimes very good experience to try to find and read blogs of people who born in the same place than you and then live in other place you want to visit and culture you want to understand. Because such people who live a long time in different culture can mark the most significant differences and most important thing. And it's very interesting to read about this and then trying to compare uh, other opinion and your opinion after you visit this place and try to join this culture.
Definitely. Blogs are another great tool because you get people's kind of personal observations about things. And yeah, that's a very good point to make. I like that. Like, Elliot, what about you? What do you think about what you can do to understand a culture that's not your own? What all do you think you can do?
And I think that we can use internet to read different societies about different countries. There are lots of nowadays. Of course, there are lots of travel blogs of travelers. Sometimes they're also very interesting. So I think that nowadays internet is um, the most valuable maybe resource to take information. Here we can find every kind of almost every kind of information. So the first place is here. All other things like watching movies, reading books, they are also very important and valuable, but I think they're a bit slower. And internet is the most the fastest way to get some information, and more wide, maybe. I don't know how it is called. How is it called?
The what?
Lots of information here, internet.
Yes,
The mo
definitely.
the most
Lots.
volume of information is here.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Well, not the most valuable, but a lot of information. And I think we have to work to try to sort out, what is valuable, what is not. But again, there's so much that we're able to differentiate in that sense. Next question, what can you do to explain your culture to others? Elia, what do you think? What can you do to explain your culture to other people?
I don't know. Just behave like I behave all the time. So it's very difficult question. I even don't think that you need to explain something, because it looks artificial when you begin to explain something. Because in usual everyday communication, we can get acquainted with each other, and I think that's the most convenient and the most natural way of communication.
Elia? Denise, sorry about that. I don't know. My browser shut down. I don't know. I got disconnected, but are you still there?
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
still there.
Yes, yes.
Sorry about that. I don't know. That was very, very strange. I just kind of technical problems of these sort of things. But then for this sort of explaining your culture to others, Elia, what would you say is the most important thing about that? What's the most important thing you can do to explain your culture to others?
Just to be natural.
Okay.
As
Yeah,
I behave as I am.
that sounds like a good idea. Denise, what about you? What do you think? What's the best way, or, how do you explain your culture to other people?
Mm, I'm not sure that I truly understand uh, what does it mean explaining my culture to others. Because usually it's a part of common communication process and
Well,
all.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, but maybe, for example, if someone has a stereotype about your culture and you want to explain because you feel like, your culture is more than that stereotype, what do you do to inform the person who doesn't know maybe the bigger truth about your culture? I remember one time on the playground, I was with a Russian friend of mine, and in her child and everything. And anyway, there was another local family, and they say, "Oh, you're from Russia. Oh, vodka. Ha 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 ha." Like about what you eat. And it was very strange because here's this little boy, who's on a playground, and his mother is saying, well, no, I mean, no, we eat borscht, we have, these different foods, and she's explaining, maybe something that this lady who made this very, very strong stereotype didn't know anything about. So, I mean, that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Like, what do you do to explain your culture to someone who doesn't have really any understanding of it? For the sake of, I don't know, maybe just better communication between people, better understanding between people.
Mm, I can't remember a real situation where it was some misunderstanding of culture or some big stereotypes. Usually, people we say, which I communicate ask me about some cultural features which uh, can be interesting for him. So one story I can remember, I was at marriage of my friend at Paris, and the part of guest was from French and part was from Russia. And at one moment, a French guest asked us to remember some marriage traditions from Russia. And it was hard because in uh, our social sphere there is really no big difference, and we are trying to remember something and and we also modify some historical thing, trying to find anything useful for such case. So
Yeah, that's the thing. Communication, talking, thinking. I mean, sometimes it's difficult, but yeah, just talking, I think, is a great way
yes,
to explain your culture to other people. Just talking, asking questions, giving answers, thinking, sharing. That's a really great way to share your culture, but also to learn something about someone else's.
yes. So um, and I can't remember some other. And another thing is some interested in local traditions, local uh, the way of solving problem. For example, in all southern countries, there are different way how to feel better at in the summer at a hot day time. So such thing, but it's I know can't remember situation. There was I was in effect that I should share something or should explain something. So for me, the difference between people in one culture usually generally bigger than sometimes difference between different cultures.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. Elia, what do you think? What kind of things can you do to explain your culture?
Of course, we should communicate, explain some things, but sometimes maybe it's even useful not to mention just some stupid replies, or maybe not very um, suitable replies at the moment about concerning culture, because sometimes they can be painful, and sometimes it is not very maybe clever to show that it is painful for me. Just I think it's a part of art to make a joke from all of that. So I think that's the way to communicate. Sometimes maybe not even to talk, but not to mention, and to make a joke of that. Take it more easier.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, making it easier, keeping it light, just sharing again, talking. What about cross-cultural communication? Again, keeping with that whole kind of talking and everything else. Do you think it's an obligation of modern times? I mean, do you think that there's any way that we can't partake in cross-cultural communication? What would you say, Adia? Is there a way around it, or is it just something that we have to do? I mean, it's 2018. What are our chance choices?
Yes, cross-cultural communication is very, really very useful, because I think we can take best parts from other cultures, um, try to do the same, try to be better. Maybe when remember that my example from our German family. Maybe for me, for example, it was good lesson just to try to be more polite. Try to mention that there is some private space of other people, because it was another situation in a bank, in different queues. People abroad, especially in Europe, they try to step a bit a bit farther, just not to come very close. That is not the same in Russian. In Russia, it's not the same. So maybe we can travel a lot and take the best things and try to invent in our own culture, and in the whole, the world will be better.
Okay, that's a very positive outlook. I like that. Denise, what about you? What do you think? I mean, is there a way around cross-cultural communication in this day and age, or is it just something we have to do? We have to talk to different cultures, we have to work with them and live with them. What do you think? Is there a way around it, or is it just something that we're going to do? We're going to continue to expand. We're a globalized society. What do you think?
To me, there is no big difference between cross-cultural communication or usual communication, because people are very different, and people have different experience, different way of thinking, different his own traditions even. So it's a part of most common questions: how to communicate, how to explain yourself, how to understand other people better, how to find instrument and way to solving a communication problem. So, and I have many um, proofs in my life why it was very important, because most part of my work time I work with abroad people, with abroad companies and on abroad companies, and it's I find not a big part people, but who really meet problems on understanding people on other project site, or even his teammates or something else. So communication and instrument to simplify communication is very important thing in our modern life. And cross-cultural communication, it's only a small part of it.
Very good point, Denise. Very good point, and very true. I mean, exactly. It's not just cross-cultural or intercultural, it's communication, and that is something that I think we definitely can't avoid. We're so linked in that sense, that, yeah, I mean, what are we going to do? We've got to talk to other people, we've got to share, we've got to work together, we've got to find new solutions, and it's just the reality of our life these days. Do you think that cultural values or personal values are stronger? Denise, what do you think? Do you think that cultural values or personal values are stronger? I think that your other questions make me lean toward personal values, because you really talk about how it's not just cross-cultural, it's communication in general. What would you say? Would you say that these cultural values or personal values are stronger?
Mm, For me, uh, personal values, or I'm not sure that I hear well.
Yeah, what do you think are these? What do you think are stronger, cultural values or personal
Oh,
values?
got it. To my mind, cultural values is some part of in uh, growth and in understand not shaping of personal values. So on first place, of course, it's uh, mm, mm, people own values and understanding something and viewpoint. and cultural values only can affect on personal values. But this is works good for rather intelligent people. For part of people, the simple way not to try and understand or find his own values, but to get some ready values. And usually it's some religious or culture or something else. But to me, it's not very interesting case. And for me, it's usually hard to communicate and understand such people.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that. And then what about you? What do you think? Do you think that cultural values or personal values are stronger?
I think that cultural values that is more general definition, of course, because all people, society is stronger than one person. So cultural values are very important. But on the other hand, each person makes the whole cultural value. So sometimes it is difficult to decide what is more important, what is stronger, because in certain situations, maybe the personal value is the most important thing. So it depends on situation, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It depends on the situation, depends on the person too. I mean, I think different people have different value systems. I mean, what is important? Is it going to be something that's going to maybe benefit you, benefit your society? You know, I mean, yeah, it's all a very political and social issue, and there is no clear-cut answer there at all. It's all a very situation-specific, individual-specific question and answer. What about interaction across cultures? What do you think is the most important thing when it comes to social interaction across cultures? Ade, what do you think? Is it knowing a language? Is it wanting a result? What do you think? I mean,
I think the most important thing to get to good result, to that result that will be interesting and acceptable for both sides, because all the time we've got different interests, and what is interesting for one part of people, it is not interesting and not suitable for the other part. So that is the difficulty of the communication in overall, and cultural communication too. So I think yes, language is also very important, but psychology, I think maybe uh, wisdom is much more important in in every communication.
yes, this is very true. This is very true. Denise, what do you think? What do you think is most important when it comes to social interaction across cultures?
Having a goal to communicate or have some similar interest or something else. Mm, I remember good. I have a good remembrance. 9 years ago, I had a first experience when I was communicating about project I work on with other guy from America, and usually there was our team manager, and my English was extremely poor at that time, and he helped me to understand what asked from me, helped me how to uh, mm, uh, how to explain myself and so on. And that was case where I was alone, and that was a panic for me. And I think, oh, I can't understand anything. I can't explain anything. It's a awful situation. But really, we both want to understand ourselves. We want to share project state to understand what happens, how it works, and so on. And this helps greatly. So yes, of course, I not understand all on the time, and I explain not all I want, but we communicate, and there was result. And step by step, I train myself to speak well and to communicate well. So for me, most important it's a good goal to communicate, to explain, and to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That desire, that willingness to communicate, that wanting to understand. I think language is also important, maybe finding that common language, whether it is an international language like English, maybe Russian, depending on where you might happen to be, but also maybe reaching out and trying to learn other languages if you're going to visit some other place. I mean, these are all the sort of things that we can use to really, have this social interaction across cultures. Next question is cultural appropriation. Are you familiar with this term? And what do you think can be done to avoid offending others by showing interest in other cultures? Denise, are you familiar with the term cultural appropriation?
Uh, Sorry, I can't understand the question. I try to. Okay. Yes. I meet this phrase when I reading articles, but not remember it.
Okay, that
Uh,
happens. That happens. But
to,
it's like culture appropriation. It's this. It's, for
uh,
example, if someone is doing, I don't know, if some French woman is into belly dancing. She does belly dancing and everything like this, and she's into, all of these Turkish movements and styles and everything else. And then some Turkish woman comes and says, "Hey, no, that's my culture," or something like that, and you're appropriating my culture. Or I mean, it happens a lot in dance, or maybe in costumes or something like that. Like, for example, you have some new fashion line that's some new again, I don't know why I'm using France. Okay, some new that's fashion. Anyway, some new French fashion line that is based on traditional Chinese dress. And then some Chinese man goes, "Hey, that's cultural appropriation. That's our culture. That's our dress." That's the sort of thing. So it's something that in the West, in the U.S., for example, in particular, you see a lot more of. You say, "Hey, you can't just take something that's ours and make it yours." So what do you think be done to avoid that sort of?
uh,
Yeah.
to my mind, the most comfortable way, especially for me, is to create your own culture, create my own culture, and at that point, my own culture is really different appropriations from another cultures. But also sometimes I think that cultural appropriations uh, can I can't understand change cultures so much that we lost some cultural differences and some specific features. But I'm not sure that it's really bad because cultural evolution is usually cultural appropriations. We have many Latin words in English. We have many Greek words and English words in Russian, and there is all time appropriations, and it's a good driver for cultural evolution and cultural growth. So for me, it's not a really big problem.
Okay.
But I meet people which think that cultural should be very different, and this is bad thing. But it's a not comfortable viewpoint for me.
All right. Elia, what do you think? Cultural
Uh,
appropriation. Are you familiar with this at all?
um, um, I can't speak from my experience because, yes, for me it is not a standard situation. because yes, I understand what are you talking about, but I as for me, I met other situations. For example, when Russian people they wear for some holidays or some for some I don't know for some events ethnic clothes because I was born in Middle Asia, so I had that experience. That is um, the only feeling they have in Aboriginal people is only respect that when you wear that ethnic clothes you want to be closer to other culture and I think it is good. I, I think it is very good and it helps to try another culture and I don't think that there can be some negative things about that.
I like that view. I think it's a very nice view. It's appreciating, not appropriating, but appreciating culture. I think that's a very good point you make. Well, guys, I mean, I think we're just about up when it comes to time for this. It was nice to meet with you again for our conversation club. Do you have any ideas for a topic for our next meeting? Denise, Celia, any ideas for topics for our next meeting?
Looks like I have no idea. I'll try to invent something to next lesson.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not sure, but what do you think about mass media? Would be it interesting or not?
Yeah, that could
Just
be.
Good topic.
Yes? No? Yes?
yes,
Mm,
okay.
Okay. But
okay.
when will our next meeting be then?
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you
Okay.
very much, Danielle. Thank you very much, Denise.
Thank you, Elia. Thank you, Denise. It was great chatting with you.
So, mm,
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye.
thank you. Goodbye.